Think that when people, I think words like DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, they become so stigmatized and polarized, especially today. And the way I've always talked about those things is that it's not a skill to be diverse, right? It's not a skill to be, equitable. It's really, those are outputs of great leadership. For the companies, it's always just an honor for people to invite in your work and your practice. That often organizations are trying to figure out what is the culture we want to have. Where we are not now, either we don't like it or we know this isn't the end of the story and we can be better or greater. Or often if there's a climate survey or employee engagement survey, they're kind of befuddled by some of the comments or the ratings, and we assess, we do the, in terms of analyzing and thinking about, well, how do you want it to be?
Managing a global team is complex, but Deel makes it simpler with payroll, HR, IT, and compliance all in one place. That's why over 35,000 businesses trust Deel to hire, pay, and manage teams worldwide. See how Deel works at DEEL.com/NICKDAY. That's Deel.com/Nick Day. Deel, your forever people platform. Hello and welcome back to the HR L&D Podcast. I'm your host. My name is Nick Day. I'm CEO at JGA Recruitment Group, and we are specialist human resources recruiters with offices in the UK and now the USA as well. Now, today is going to be a really exciting and interesting show. I have a guest to share with you. I've been really excited to bring onto this show since she was first introduced to me. Now, let me ask you a couple of questions before I do the introduction. The first is, listeners, what if the secret to unlocking transformational leadership lied in redefining inclusion, embracing vulnerability, and amplifying collective intelligence? Well, today we are joined by a guest who's absolutely reshaping how we lead, how we connect, and how we create a lasting impact in our workplaces, something that I know all of my listeners are very passionate about achieving. So today's guest, of course, is Aiko Bethea. She's founder of Rare Coaching and Consulting, a globally recognized leader in the space of DEI. She's also worked across sectors, including government, philanthropy, and of course, Fortune 100 companies as well. She's really passionate about removing barriers to inclusion and fostering belonging. She's also a best-selling author of the book, Anchored, Aligned, and Accountable. And we'll make sure for those that are interested, there is a link later on in the show. You can grab yourself a copy. But let's just say it's very much a fantastic framework for transcending, shall we say, with a little beep here, the bullshit that lives in our lives and transforming our lives and work as a result as well. She's been named by Forbes as one of the top anti-racism educators. She collaborates with leaders to challenge the status quo and create workplaces where everyone, yes, everyone can thrive. So we're in great and exciting hands today. Aiko, welcome to the HR L&D Podcast. How are you feeling?
Great. Thank you so much for having me here.
Super excited. You know what's coming? My first question I ask all of my guests, which is this. For you, what do the words human resources mean?
I think it means helping people or supporting people, resourcing them to stay human and to be human, even in the workplace. And that often means not just helping people to figure out what they're supposed to be doing in terms of their roles and responsibilities and skills, but also helping them and supporting them in how they're being, in terms of wellness, in terms of anchoring into who they are, in terms of how they engage with their colleagues, their environment, their workplace, their world, and how they collectively create that. And I think you need resources to help people to do that and to just remember that every day.
Right, what a beautiful way to start. And actually, that links quite nicely to something I heard you once say, which is who we are is how we lead. Now, from a human resources context, from those that are often responsible for leading others, but also leading the shape of their organization, how can we unpack this idea and how can it really help shape our listeners' approach to leadership?
Oh, man, I wish I could take credit for that quote. It's not mine at all.
Okay.
It's actually from Brene Brown. And, her work is amazing and phenomenal. So her statement about who we are is how we lead. I think one of the things he said when we were opening it up was also about the importance of vulnerability, which, is the anchor of her work. But this idea of understanding who we are enough so that we have enough of self-awareness so that we realize who you are actually seeps into every aspect of what you do. Not only how you raise your children, but how you speak to the secretary or assistant at work, how you lead your direct reports. All of those things are integrated. And I always talk about, once upon a time we had this way of expecting that people came to the workplace and they lived in a vacuum. So that would look like, Nick was at home, had some terrible news. And by the time he gets to the office, he needs to shut that down, compartmentalize it, and show up as Nick at work, superstar. Or somebody, I had an argument with my partner or what have you. My kids are really sick, maybe terminally sick, whatever is happening, the news today, which can always be very overwhelming nowadays. And I come to work and I'm supposed to put on this mask and all of a sudden be someone totally different. That is not honest. It's not real. It's not even viable in terms of somebody not only thriving, but even being able to show up and focus. So this idea of what you're encountering and how you process what's happening every day and to the core of who you are, how you decide to respond or acknowledge, that's going to impact everything, including how you lead at work.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. I think there's a few things for me to unpack in that. I think there's an expectation maybe to bring our best selves to work because, of course, we're paid to do a job, and it's the most basic sense of the word, I guess, of employment. But at the same time, that doesn't mean we should forget some of the things that every individual is going through. I always say to my kids, I always be more kind because everyone is going through something, and it's almost impossible to sometimes park that at the door. But then on the other side of the coin, for me, we do walk around with all these different identities. I've got Nick the parent, Nick the dad, Nick the boss, the CEO, Nick, Nick the sportsman, the athlete, whatever it is. And actually, I create some of those personas for myself. So I think it's an interesting question because I was on another show called the Maverick Podcast, a brilliant show about Maverick leadership by the wonderful Jude Germain. And she'd said, Nick, do you think we should be able to bring our true selves, our authentic selves to work? And my answer was absolutely. However, that doesn't mean I always want to show all of me at work. There are certain parts of my identity that I don't always want to show, but we still need to have that psychological safety to be able to be vulnerable and share it if we feel the need to. I'd be interested to get your perspective on that as an expert here. And where do the barriers stop? Where's the line for the individuals listening that want to be authentic, want to feel safe and being vulnerable, but it's sometimes a difficult thing to grasp?
Yeah, what I would say, just in all transparency and honesty, is the idea that, no one wants to see my whole self. I don't want to see my whole self sometimes. I'm always trying to become better. And the workplace, like you said, it serves a certain purpose. But we also understand that at the workplace, for them to actually harness the best out of its employees, the boundaries need to be clear and the reason and context as well. And not to the point that it is dehumanizing someone or
Right.
asking or expecting them to be a robot, I suppose I would say. And we're in a society or a global society now where there is so much polarization. I personally don't think there's a such thing as this utopic space where there's always going to be alignment or everyone's going to love each other every day or embrace each other. But the idea is to create space where there is room for when there is fracturing, because relationships are like that. Relationships, there are ruptures and there are repairs.
Yeah.
But are you self-aware enough to be able to lean into, one, asking yourself, what's my part in this? And being able to own that. And the other part is being able to hold other people accountable with generosity. I was listening to some of your other podcast hosts, and I am so in agreement about the need to build this skill set and this muscle around holding others accountable.
Yeah.
But before you even get there, there is the importance of being able to hold yourself accountable. And many of us, we are really great at being, pointing and seeing everything that's happening everywhere else. But even before you embark on a conversation with somebody about feedback or whatever it is, have you asked yourself the question, like, what's my part in this? And then the other part is, who do I want to be in this conversation? What's the impact? A lot of folks start at the idea of when you go into these conversations around tough conversations or accountability, we're always thinking about what we need to correct in this person. Or we talk about listening, channel 1 or channel 2 listening, right? Which is a lot in effective communication about listening to hear is channel 1, listening to understand is channel 2. But I really advocate for people to think about this other channel, listening for connection. And I write a lot about this because I think when you notice that if I'm talking to you, Nick, and I'm coming in thinking that I just want to hear what he has to say, I have a whole different somatic impulse. I use different language. My cadence and how I talk is different. My eye contact with you is even different.
Sure.
But if I'm coming in framing listening with connection, my cadence slows down. I shift into curiosity. There's more of a sphere of empathy. My body language is different. I am thinking about Nick as a person so I can get this greater understanding where now I do hear what you say. I understand, and I also can be more aware of how to engage with you. So if people are leaning into this idea of self-awareness, where we're also talking about listening at channel 3, which I call listening for connection, everything changes in that interaction. The way that you are in the world and in the workplace is different as well. So we need to focus about this whole self-centered of, I need to be able to show my whole self. I have a right to be blah, blah, blah. But I'm thinking about my whole ecosystem environment and how I want it to be. And I'm thinking and centering not Aiko now, who will continually be flawed and hopefully on this journey of self-improvement, but I'm also thinking about aspirational self. Who do I hope to be and what type of impact do I want to have on others? And that's why I always have to be thinking about this idea of self-awareness and holding myself accountable even before I'm holding others accountable. And I think it goes a long way to your statement about, do we bring our whole selves to work?
No, I couldn't agree more. I think you've raised some beautiful things in that. I think the listening for connection is a beautiful way of putting it. I think you used a word that I personally feel is massively underused in the world of business, which is curiosity. But I also think with leaders that are listening to this, often they may counter with some of the insights that you're providing to say, look, everything you said sounds wonderful, but I haven't got the time to always reflect. And I think that's one of the most important things. We can always find the time if we're motivated to find it. That's my true belief. But I do think as well that it's the value that we can find in those reflective moments and those those moments to be curious. And a good counter which you raised brilliantly when I said, I don't always want to bring these things. It's not just about the I, it's about the we and about the business and about the broader scheme of things. And I think I heard it again on another podcast called the High Performance Podcast, where the presenter there, Jake, once said, Nick, or wasn't speaking to me personally, but I felt like he was. He was speaking to the guest, but I felt it, he was talking to me. And he said, when you have an incident, always remember, your initial reaction is based on your own upbringing, social standard, education, parenting, nurture, all those things. The reason the other individuals come at you the way they have is because of all their situational things that I have no experience of. And maybe if I'd been exactly the same person, he'd have responded like I would, and they would have responded like I would. And it's having that appreciation that just because that's where we come from doesn't make that the right answer. It's about being curious. Why have they come to me like that? Why have they approached the problem in that way? Seek to understand and seek to connect. I think you use the word curiosity and it was like a light bulb for me. I think it's an underused term. And I'd love to get your take on that, because I think curiosity also links to a more sort of coaching type culture of empowerment within business rather than that command and control element. I think we have probably moved away from, but we still got a little way to go.
And we're kind of regressing in some spaces, right?
Yeah.
With the command and control. I love this question that you have about curiosity because it's such a cornerstone, but I want to actually peel back a layer around this, because we usually think about curiosity in terms of, I'm very curious, external facing. Like, what is it that Nick is really saying or what's happening, which is important, but we don't exercise what I call critical curiosity, which is, I am curious about myself, to the point that I'm excavating beliefs and ideas I have. And I'm curious about, where did I get that? And does it align with who I want to be now or tomorrow? So the fact that you brought in, that we're multidimensional and we have all of these things from aspects of our lives, some that we just absorbed, but we weren't intentional about, is this what I believe in? So I talk to people often, even in a coaching sense, for somebody to change something, they have to be aware of what they're changing, right? And what you're changing, the surface level of it is that thing that you do, right? Or that thing that you're avoiding doing. That's the surface level. But for us to change it, I have to go all the way down to what is motivating that behavior. And there's usually a belief underneath it, right? And we all know immunity to change work talks about shifting a belief. But people rarely talk about the work that we do to be critically curious to figure out, where did I get that belief? So family of origin and community of origin is major around that. And if we're thinking about some of the beliefs I just internalized, no one ever told me this is our family's belief. Doctrine number one. But I do know that in my household, where I was raised in an immigrant family household and we were very low income, was that you always needed to be productive and therefore also contributing to the household. So if you were asleep past 5:30 in the morning, you were being lazy. You needed to be productive and always doing something. And what that did all the way to my adult years is that I judged myself and others based on
Right.
how much they were doing. And what does that take us to? Toxic productivity. Not in terms of what impact we're trying to make or what way who we want to be in the world, but it's just how much are you doing? So that always left me in a space of feeling like I needed to earn rest. It also impacted how I parented. Because my two giant teenage boys, from when they were younger, I'd say, why are you still in bed? It's 6 a.m. And so I really had to unlearn that and figure out, why do I believe this? Like that we always have to be doing something every day before we can go to a movie and enjoy it. We've got to earn it by doing the whole to-do list. So I say that as an example of a belief that I had to identify so I could excavate it, so I would no longer have that behavior of toxic productivity and imposing that judgment on others. So that critical curiosity, when you say curiosity, it's so important not only to be in connection with other people and be curious about them, as you mentioned, but critical curiosity about ourselves to increase our self-awareness so that I understand, why am I doing these things? And I can be much more intentional about, does this align with who I want to be and the impact I want to have?
It's incredible, because for me, and I've done some of this analysis on myself, and my wife would say sometimes I'm very defensive, and I'd never appreciated this till she brought it up. And then she gave me a few examples, and over a period of time, wasn't one conversation, we managed to identify where this came from, which is an incident I went through when I was still in my childhood, right, and made me very defensive due to a relatively traumatic time. I'm not saying it always goes back to trauma, but it was something that I had never personally identified with. And it took me to that place. And then suddenly I became self-aware of when I was becoming defensive. It was like an out-of-body experience. I think actually my default was to instantly defend. And actually that's not always the most productive, the most way. And as soon as you become aware of it and you catch yourself,
Yes.
the whole view changes. The whole perspective of a situation or a circumstance changes. And you use the word belief. And a good friend of mine, Harry Kalimnios, once said to me, who I co-host on another show, said, Nick, in the middle of belief is the word lie. And sometimes it's worth just looking at it, right? And just saying, are they really true? Or are we making them true for us? And you mentioned earlier, right at the start of the show, that we live in a kind of society now where there's lots of binary opinions. And it's almost become on trend to have an opposing view to everything, to play devil's advocate to every situation. And I think that sometimes is unfortunately blocking some of that curiosity. It's almost more important for us in leadership roles to have a view or be seen to have a view before we've taken that moment to step back and self-reflect. So with that in mind, I'd love to know from your perspective, and obviously these are just my views, and I want to listen to your insights, because honestly, the work you've done in this space, and please, I will put the links later in the show notes, please go and follow Aiko's work, because it's fantastic. But you've done some really good work in breaking down the barriers that leaders have created for themselves that have really helped foster true inclusion, not just for themselves, but with their teams and also with the broader organization. So I wonder if I can just dive into a little bit of that work that you've been doing for the people listening to this, so they can take some of those insights away.
Right. I think that when I think words like DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, they become so stigmatized and polarized, especially today. And the way I've always talked about those things is that it's not a skill to be diverse, right? It's not a skill to be, equitable. It's really, those are outputs of great leadership. And when you think about inclusion or inclusive workplaces, I always believe that work is something that always starts within us. It's very hard to be inclusive in spaces around you with a degree of intentionality when you, one, are unaware of who you are. You're excluding parts of yourself, or you have high judgment about parts of yourself. Like, there's no way I could lead a team in a way where I give them more autonomy and I'm not looking at the task of what they've done today if I had not done that work in myself about why, what me being, having toxic productivity and my thinking that every moment I have to be doing something. I don't think I could have changed that behavior towards others until I changed it within myself and understood where it was coming from. So it's not a matter of looking outside and being like, I'm going to be inclusive of these people, this person. It is, how do I become a whole person? And with that, you start chipping away maybe some of the barriers and the judgment that's there. And usually that judgment is harsher for people in terms of self-judgment than it even is when we see it externally. So I always believe in people doing their own work of learning themselves and being able to name, who do I truly want to be and what's the impact I want to have? And that's in the core of our coaching. I have a coaching agency. So we have about 30 certified coaches. And the part about it is just going on a journey with your client and being curious with them, right? Holding a container where there's non-judgment and they can name out loud a belief they have. When you talked, Nick, about going back and saying, oh my gosh, now I understand why I'm defensive. That wasn't just you sitting down and something hitting you on the head and you say, okay, now I'm going to change it. It was, wow, this is where this comes from. What does it mean? What does it mean in terms of my behavior? And do I want to be like this? And you have to make these judgments and these decisions as you go along and then say, if I don't want to be like this because I want to be this person or have this impact, I want to experiment with doing this differently. Now you have to name a behavior because now you've identified the belief. One of the things that is the hardest, I think, for people to change their behavior when they're critically curious is it can be, it requires a lot of emotional labor at times. When I started realizing some of the beliefs I had, for me to be critical about them and to decide I reject that belief and I'm going to do this differently, it also meant that maybe I had to see people in my life differently. People who are well-intentioned and who love me and who I love. And I realized this is where I got this belief from. And that can leave people into moments of grief, anger. Yeah. I am now going to look at this person differently, or I decide I'm going to have different boundaries with them, with my children. And that is emotional labor. It's not just, oh my gosh, I saw this. Even when you name something as being a traumatic experience, you had to work through that. Otherwise, you had to, if you didn't have a threshold for vulnerability, you just park it over here in that door and you never go back. So I say all of this because I want to make sure we're not selling people a product of this is easy. You get a coach or you sit and you contemplate and you're going to change. It's not easy work. That's
I'd like to say, HR leaders, I know you're driving culture, transformation, engagement, and now digital reinvention as well. But none of that works without the right people in the right seat. I'm Nick Day, host of this podcast, but also founder of JGA Recruitment Group. And here's what I hear every week, top HR leaders. They say, Nick, we can't find the talent. It's our biggest challenge. And when we do, we can't retain them. Well, that's where we come in. At JGA, we specialize in HR recruitment and only HR recruitment. From executive search assignments placing CHROs to contingency hires finding HR pros to global HR transformational contract placements and every people role in between. Across every vertical and at every single level, we know where the top people are, what motivates them, and most importantly, how to get them excited about your opportunity even if they're not actively looking. With engagement rates over 90%, we don't rely on job boards. We rely on relationships. We place fast, we place right, and we do it in a way that reflects your brand, your values, and your goals. So if you're building a strategic HR function, please don't leave it to chance. Visit jjrecruitment.com or reach out to me directly and let's build the future of work together. From my perspective, it made me reanalyze a lot of my personal situations and conversations and wondered how closed-minded I could have been to some of those conversations because of my defensive nature. And I've had to teach myself to be open. And it doesn't mean I'm always perfect, but I try and be more open-minded and more curious. If I feel, it's almost like I can associate with a feeling now. If I feel it come up, I can kind of step back away from it and try and go, am I, being defensive here? Or is it always a genuine reason for the defensiveness that goes beyond my nature, if you like, or my learned nature? It was interesting you mentioned earlier on about the toxic productivity piece, because this is often how biases start. And often we feel like they're unconscious. They're there. We don't recognize them. And that's where that self-awareness comes in of going, actually, it's because of the way that, I was nurtured or brought up that I've created this this view of the world that is linking, leading me to be biased in certain situations. It allows us, I think, to bring some of those biases to the fore and hopefully improve them, eradicate them if they're not good biases to have or whatever. But it gives us that self-reflective moment, which I think is really, really powerful. I know in what you've just mentioned here, we talk about in the context of DEI, you talking about it as being a leadership competency then rather than an initiative. This isn't something that comes into a leadership framework and says, hey, we're going to do DEI now, right? It needs to be, come from actually a leadership competence of something that's right for the right reasons, not just because it's been mandated.
Yeah, and even more than that, it's not even a competency. It is the output of all the other competencies. So
okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, of being willing to and able to lean into difficult conversations, to be empathetic, to be self-reflective, to have EQ. Like if you have that type of leadership competency, the output is naturally going to be that you're much more inclusive of other people. You are going to be seeing beyond all of these external or other factors of people because you're going to be thinking about the essence of what they're bringing, their possibility, their potential, because you've given yourself that gift, right? I wish we had time for even a whiteboard because what you said earlier, I keep going back because I'm holding what you were saying when you just talked about your journey in doing something differently. The reflection you had, somebody named it. I think you said your spouse named it. So you realize I'm having this impact. And you didn't just sit there and say, no, I'm not. No, I'm not. You actually reflected. You invited yourself to be critically curiosity to say, what's my part in this? You remember this moment where you said, holy cow, this is why I do this. And then you also thought about how did this impact others? Like this self-accountability part isn't just in a moment. You went back and looked at who was I in all of these moments. So it didn't require somebody to say, oh, Nick, and then you did this. You were so self-reflective, willing to take ownership, and then saying, I don't want to be like this. I mean, these are, if we could whiteboard all the skills that it takes to do all of this, and then for you to get to this point where now you also said you realized what was happening for you somatically. You said, I get this feeling, and then I stop and I realize it. So the embodiment part is just gold. Most of us live from here to here. You were talking about you get this feeling because now you've allowed yourself to feel something when this happens. You identify it, and then you arrest yourself. Wait, I want to do this. Many people do not have the skill of being embodied. So you went almost through the full 360 loop. And the thing when you're talking to people about this, the main thing they come up with about why not to do this work is because it takes time. Time is the smallest part of it when you think about all of the growth that is happening in every increment for this change to happen. And if we could just, all of those components that you put together are all leadership components. Every one of them.
They all require space, don't they? That's the thing. They all require space to self-reflect. And it's the space, it's that time which a lot of HR leaders listening to this will feel like they struggle to find the time to do. They finish work, they go into roles of, parenting their kids or whatever else they've got to do outside of work. It's a frenetic profession. They're juggling lots of plates at the same time, trying to keep, or spinning lots of plates at the same time, trying to keep them all in the air and don't want them to fall. I remember reading a great book by Michael Neill. I'm not sure if you're familiar with his work, but he talks about looking at things as if you're in a glass elevator. So the reflection that I would have is I'm looking at a particular problem, but what floor am I on? The lower the floor, the lower the level of thinking. The higher the floor, the greater the perspective. And for me, it's a moment where I can capture, and if anyone's listening to this, try this out. For me, it works. If you look at something and you're closed-minded, often you're working at a really low-level floor. So what can I do to my thinking to raise myself up a level and look at it a little bit differently? I know that myself and you, Aiko, looking at the same problem may look at it from totally different perspectives. Mm-hmm. And that sometimes you can learn. We never look at the same thing and think exactly the same thing. That's what makes us human. Mm-hmm. It's learning from other people's perspectives and trying to say, okay, that's how I'm viewing it. I love that view because I like the sea, and you love the view because you like the sky and the sunshine. We look and notice at different things. And that idea of raising myself up through the glass elevator has been really powerful for me as a little technique, I guess, to go, okay, how am I looking at this? How can I move myself up a level? It's not always possible, but I try to just go, oh, can I move myself up again and again? And how am I looking at it now? And it's a nice way of framing a particular situation.
And I imagine for you and people who have this trait that I'm going to call a learner mindset, it can even be almost automatic. Because as a learner, you're always thinking, I don't know the answer all the time. And you're always recognizing that the teacher can be anybody else. Like you're the student at every moment. So the teacher doesn't have to be someone in front of the room or who's credentialed. It can be your kid, right? But the learner mindset is that you're always looking for this growth and this expansion, which means that by nature and a fundamental truth, you have to embrace, I don't know everything. As a matter of fact, maybe I know nothing, right? And so I love like the idea of with the elevator, what level am I on? And I think always the higher level is not because I nailed it, I know it, I'm here, but I'm more of a blank slate. I'm much more expansive and open. I'm willing to hold myself accountable. I realize that in this, there may be temporary pain in terms of grief or recognizing I did something I didn't want to do. But in it, that expansive growth is what's going to change me to be better for me and my ecosystem, right?
Right. I mean, and also, yeah, you've nailed it. That's exactly what it is, and it's an ongoing. It's just like capturing yourself moment and trying to be more open minded to any situation or any conversation. And it's something you have. It does kind of start to happen more automatically now, but it's taken some time to get there. Right, you got to go through that process. And obviously, you work with some amazing companies, Fortune 100 businesses, governments, philanthropic organizations. And your business, of course, is Rare Coaching. You mentioned you've got sort of 30 coaches that work for you. Tell us a little bit more about some of the work that you do with your clients and some of the transformational work in particular, because some of it's really quite interesting. You've definitely become one of these individuals that's looked up to in the world of transformational leadership because you've been able to liberate a lot of the organizations and the leaders that you work with. So it'd be great to hear a little bit more about some of that work.
I will say that for the companies, one, it's always just an honor for people to invite in your work and your practice. That often organizations are trying to figure out what is the culture we want to have. Where we are not now, either we don't like it or we know this isn't the end of the story and we can be better or greater. Or often if there's a climate survey or employee engagement survey, they're kind of befuddled by some of the comments or the ratings. And we assess, we do the, in terms of analyzing and thinking about, well, how do you want it to be? It's always that intentionality of having a North Star of how do you want it to be? Yeah. And how does it align with your organizational values, et cetera? Like making sure that there's this idea of what impact you all want to have. How do you want it to be? How do you describe it in terms of behaviors? And the part that usually causes people to stumble is, and the sustainability. How are you going to hold yourself accountable? Not only as a C-suite leaders, but also as an organization. That's usually where people stumble and try to figure out how are we going to implement this longer term. And I think that's often the gift of not only practices and processes, but having a tool like an executive coach. Like when you were saying before, leaders saying, I just don't have time to stop or to rest myself. Well, that is part of the container that an executive coach brings to people, right? A space, even if it's only once every 2 weeks, to stop, reflect in that thing that you're working on, that thing that was eating you. Where are you now? What's happening with that? So I think the majority of our clients, I think 88% of our clients are all repeat clients, so multi-year clients. And being able to see the longer term shift in their culture, see new learnings they've gotten about themselves or things they've excavated that maybe they don't feel so good about. That's the best part. And of course, the relationships that you make. But that executive coaching piece of having somebody holding a container for you and sometimes a mirror and just there with you, not telling you what to do, not telling you the answer, but in the journey to do that work that we talked about. Because it's hard when you realize, man, I've really been messing up here. Or, oh my gosh, who did I have this impact on? Or even the idea of celebrating something that maybe somebody else would say, well, you should have been doing that all along. But having that container to be able to do this work is invaluable. And we know the studies about coaching. The thing that I know many of our clients now are really chomping at the bit for and love is learning how to take a coaching stance with their direct reports. How do they take that stance? And folks always think that you're just going to give them the formula, right? Do this, 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 this. And I'm like, if that's what we're going to do, just get the HBR article or the Forbes article. But the mindset is the work. You can't do these things unless you've done some mindset work. You understand what you're being intentional about. You understand what your stealth intentions are. You're willing to do the work to name what these maybe cringy and embarrassing stealth intentions are. Like, well, I really want people to know I'm the smartest one. I don't want people to think I'm dumb. Nobody wants to say that out loud. So with a coach, excavating those things in terms of what your stealth intentions are, et cetera. So when leaders and people managers have that skill, you can imagine what the ROI is, because it changes how they think and engage with people and the questions that they ask folks. And it changes that relationship between whomever they're working and engaging with. And it creates a much more expansive ecosystem where there's greater vulnerability, truth telling, honesty, skill building. All of this is now coming into the system. So that coaching stance with doing that work with our clients has been one fulfilling for us, but it has had an immeasurable impact on clients and their culture.
Yeah, I mean, you framed the nature and the power of coaching, I think, wonderfully, and it comes across that you're skilled in this way, because I think if anyone listening to this, they can rewind maybe the last 3 or 4 minutes and go back to the questions you asked at the start of your response, because I think you reeled off 5 to 10 amazing questions that organizations should be asking of themselves, and actually gave that free on this show, which is great. And maybe go back and re-listen to those, because these are the questions that leaders and organizations do need to be asking before they sort of undertake an initiative or any kind of transformational project. It makes sense to be curious, to ask those kind of open-ended questions, find out the Simon Sinek, if you like, why behind, the purpose behind why we're doing what we're doing, because that'll help you find the right path forward as well. I thought that was really interesting, because it was so natural the way these questions for you come straight to front and center, that curiosity, even though there's no real organization here we're talking about, but you're straight away in there with, these are the things I'd want to know. If we want to make transformation happen, we need to get there. But I think the other thing you mentioned, which was really interesting, was that you used the word vulnerability and storytelling. Now, I work in the world of recruitment, so the lens that I have is very much entrenched in trust and attrition. And if you haven't got trust, we've had Stephen Covey on the show, then it's really hard to trust and get your team inspired. And if they don't trust you, if they can't feel vulnerable at work, they'll often move away. If they don't feel psychologically safe, they'll go and find another employer. And I know, if people listening to this will already know, one of the biggest challenges from an HR perspective is managing employee attraction, engagement, and managing attrition. Now, if we can manage those 3 things with a great coaching culture, where people can feel vulnerable, where they can feel empowered, you're going to solve a lot of those problems in one go without needing someone like me as a recruiter, because you'll have it in the culture of your organization, right? But the other thing you mentioned with vulnerability, of course, is you've got to feel well in yourself to deliver that as a leader. And I know that, from some of the work you've done, you talk about being a well leader and not losing sight of how important wellness is in a workplace culture. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, we do talk a lot about be well, lead well. It's very hard to be able to show up at work at your best when you're sleep deprived, when your anxiety is at all-time high, when you feel like you're under attack or duress, when you feel all of these things that contribute to not being well. But we know that when your rest is there, when you're connected and you're not isolated, when you feel good about the direction you're going in, that is when you're able to also not only have more self-compassion for yourself, but generosity towards others. You're able to be more shored up, to have a difficult conversation with somebody, but to do it with generosity. You're more able to accept and even proactively invite critical feedback so that you can absorb it and metabolize it. Things are so different when you have taken a moment to take good care of yourself. And take good care of yourself, people think it's always like a spa day, or I'm going to, go to the Maldives or something like that. But taking care of yourself means also listening to yourself. And I'm just going to say again, I am so impressed of your response when you stated knowing how something felt in your body and it giving you an indicator about some piece of knowledge about yourself. Many people cannot do that. Self-care is spending time in your body and knowing your breath, knowing what your posture is doing, knowing are you eating. All of these things come together and bring clarity or take it away. Bring you closer to being your aspirational self or pulls it away. Brings you closer towards people and healthy connection or leaves you in isolation. They are so integrated, and this idea of there not being enough time. And I'm like, everybody has the same amount of time, but what is going to serve you best? What's going to serve you most? And that's so important. The human part of human resources, so important. And we can't rely on a company to do that for us or to invite us to that. We can't rely on any external forces in terms of systems that we navigate every day to do that for us. But we've got to create the niche of what does that look like in my day? Being attuned to something doesn't feel right. How I
Something that
engage with
comes
that.
to mind, there's a vision that came to mind. Sorry to, it popped up, and hopefully this is kind of what you're saying, or something. You created a vision for me, all right? So the vision was, particularly in the world of HR, I think often they don't have time because they're so busy trying to serve others. But if you're on a plane, the first thing they say to you if there's a problem is put your gas mask or your mask on you before you help everyone else. If you don't help yourself first, you can't help those around you. There's no good. And often when I'm dealing with leaders, they make themselves a single point of failure. And it's great when they're holding things together, but if you break down, everything breaks down. You need to look after yourself first, get that coach if you need to, because actually what a coach can do, and you've highlighted some great reasons, is they can give you that space to have that out of body almost experience, to self-reflect. They'll notice your speed of breath. They will give you sometimes the best coaching can just be a period of silence, just being sat there with a coach while you just reflect and take a moment for you in a safe environment to do so. So for anyone, coaching is there for the best athletes in the world, the best business people in the world. Nearly always have coaches. There must be something in it. But if you haven't got one, that could be a really good investment to just find that space, have that reflective moment, and just try and discover. Because if you're not looking after that self-care and the plane goes down, you can't help those around you. So I just think that was an image that came to me with being on an aeroplane in that kind of situation where they always say, mask on you, then everybody else.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I appreciate your saying that. And for people like us who are parenting, are taking care of others, or we've often been the nurturers, even the idea of how, if I take care of myself, I will be better for others is so compelling. And I want to add for people, if you want to live a life that is fulfilling, if you want to be intentional about who you are and how you're showing up, you've got to do this work too. It's nothing worse than meeting somebody who are in the late stages of their life and they have a life of regret.
Right.
You can't redo. You can only now move forward. So that idea of now the intentionality of doing this work so that you're living a life worthwhile, worth living, and you're intentional is why else are we here? Right? Why else are you here? And I just invite people to think about, if you want to meet the standards of your aspirational self and a life fulfilled, do this work. Yeah.
Right. Really powerful. I remember reading an article once about the 5 biggest regrets of the dying. And one of those is, I wish I hadn't worked so hard. On reflection, right? But it leads me perfectly into your book. I know we're short a little bit on time, but I do want to bring your wonderful book to the fore as well. For those that are interested, for those with the words that you've said that is resonating with, I'm sure it's everybody, by the way, because you're such an eloquent talker on this subject. You wrote a wonderful book, Anchored, Aligned and Accountable. I will put a link in the show notes for those who want to get themselves a copy. But I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit more about what that's about.
Okay, first I want to say the book comes out January 2026. The book that is
super.
a New York
We'll
Times
make sure the link is live.
Yeah, there is a book that's a New York bestseller that is out, which is the You're Your Best Thing, which is an anthology I'm in. Anchored, Aligned, Accountable comes out January 2026, and it is about being anchored in your values. It's about being aligned in terms of your impact. The impact that you have is aligned with your values and your actions. And the last part, which is, the stronghold there, is accountability. Holding yourself accountable and others accountable, and with generosity and care. And that idea of having a transformational life at home and at work, it's like these 3 ingredients for a transformational life that I've recognized not only from learning from others, but learning from my clients and the people in our ecosystem is, I know that there are 3 ingredients that are always there. One is connection, which we've talked about a few times, connecting with yourself, being aware of who you are, and connecting with others. We also know the other thing we talked about, which is about learning and growth, being expansive and welcoming of not knowing so that you can learn new things about yourself, about others, about the world, about nature. And the last one is not just rest, it's rest and spaciousness. And we alluded to the idea of people feeling like there's not enough time. So in a study that we did amongst our clients, we asked people, well, what would you do if you had more time? Because people always said, I don't have enough time, I'm too busy. And initially people would say, I would do blah 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 blah. I'd read those books. I would go do this with my kids. I blah blah. And when they're in a one-on-one coaching space of, well, what would it take for you to do that? Just more time. They would pause and they would say, you know what? No, because if I had more time, I'd have to rest. I'd have to recover. I don't even think I could read a book. I'm so tired. So that idea of spaciousness, so that you can actually, the energy it takes to do the reflection about yourself, self-reflection, and connect with others, the emotional labor with that, the learning, the growth. And then it's not just rest, it's rest and spaciousness to have that capacity to be able to notice how does something feel in your body, to be able to hold yourself accountable or somebody else. The spaciousness is so critical. So we know those three ingredients: rest and spaciousness, learning and expansion, and connection within and amongst with others are so critical to being able to do these things that we're talking about. Change, impact, living an intentional existence. And that's what the book is about.
It sounds absolutely fantastic. I think you and I could probably talk for another hour here. I would love to invite you back onto this show when that goes live so we can really bring it to the fore and continue this discussion. I think we could go and talk in so many different places here about so many different subjects that really do directly impact the HR profession. Something that popped into my head again. And when you talk, Aiko, you bring up loads of ideas. My brain is firing when you talk. Well, it's really, I hope my listeners are as engaged as I have been, and I've really enjoyed the conversation. So thank you. Something that came to mind in that last answer about your book, and I can't remember if it was an NFL coach or an NBA coach, certainly a very famous Super Bowl winning coach of sorts. And he said, when you are, and it stuck with me because what he said is when you go to commit to something. So in HR, for example, or in their profession, they commit 100% at work. They work flat out. He said the best athletes do everything at 100%, and that includes rest. When they rest at 100%. That means you are not working. That means you are not reading or whatever it is you do. Often when we rest, we are not resting at 100%. We think we are, but we start doing jobs, we get on our phones or we do whatever. He said with my athletes, Nick, the reason they peak and they perform at the optimum all the time is I make them do everything in their lives at 100%. And that includes when they're not working. It's that recovery phase. I think that's sometimes the bit that we underestimate, that we all need, and it accumulates when we don't get it. And then we burn out or we break down. And so there's a lot of people in HR that are burning out and are overworked. So that's something I took away from a sports person, but it's always stuck with me when he said it. And I was like, wow, I need to take some of that advice from myself, and hopefully the others can do the same. It sounds like there's some intentional advice in your book for people to discover as well when it goes live. So really, really interesting.
Thank you. I love that metaphor. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom as well with our listeners on today's show. I think you've given us a lot to think about. We certainly need to rethink about the way we lead ourselves as well as our teams and organizations. And that is incredibly powerful. It's been inspirational for me, Aiko. So thank you ever so much for joining me today on the HR L&D podcast. Of course, there will be a link both to the Rare Coaching and Consulting website, which I'll put in the show notes. You can get it straight through. So just click through from this episode, whether on video or audio. You can find a link to that. There'll be a link to Aiko Bethea's LinkedIn profile. And there'll also be a link to the book, which is going to be published by Penguin and coming out in 2026 as well. So you can put yourself in for that and keep an eye. And of course, we will promote that book again. And I hope in the future, we can invite you back onto the show, Aiko, so we can discover more about that book once it goes live. So thank you ever so much for joining me today on the HR L&D podcast. Thank you. Global teams are more connected than ever, but managing payroll, HR, and IT can still feel fragmented. Deel simplifies global work with one platform that keeps everything running smoothly. No compliance guesswork, no third-party payroll, just seamless operations backed by 24/7 expert support. That's why over 35,000 companies trust Deel to handle their global workforce. Visit deel.com/nickday to see how Deel can help. That's DEEL.com/NICKDAY. Deel, your forever people platform.